thousands of years ago in India, the rishis, ones who are called the rishis, the seers, the poet seers, they received hymns. And these hymns are symbolic. They reflect profound teachings about the nature of reality and the nature of the human. The original text of the Vedas, the root, is the Rig Veda Samhita. So that's where we start. That's where I start. When I think about the origins of yoga, I think about the Rig Veda Samhita. Now, time is a tricky thing because according to the tradition of yoga, the Rig Veda was never written. It exists outside of time. It exists, it predates time itself. And so to say it's the first is a little funny, but it's like the root out of which all the other teachings and texts emerge, and they continuously refer back to the art in an articulate way and also in a symbolic way to the Veda. Now, each Veda, there are 4 Vedas. There's the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Atharva Veda. I'm not going to talk much about the other 3, but the answer to the question that I asked at the beginning, what texts make up the Vedic corpus? These are the 4 Vedas that make up the Vedic corpus. The Rig Veda is what we're going to talk about. And the Rig Veda, each of the Vedas has 4 parts. So 4 Vedas, 4 parts. The 4 parts of the Vedas are the Samhita, which is kind of the core text. And the other Vedic Samhitas are a lot of kind of they base themselves on and expand upon the Rig Veda Samhita. So if we just focus on that, we're focusing on a lot. So there's a dog knocking at my door. The Rig Veda Samhita. So each of the Vedas has 4 parts: the Samhita, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads. And this is all in the text. You don't have to write it down necessarily. You don't have to remember it right now. But when I talk about the Vedic corpus, that's it. That comprises it. 4 Vedas, 4 parts. That's the Vedic corpus. Everything else that we talk about comes after. Sometimes some of the texts may be referred to as the 5th Veda, but the Vedic corpus is 4 Vedas, 4 parts. Now, the Rig Veda Samhita, again, this is the kind of nugget. This is the core out of which all the rest of it is going to emerge. It's symbolic. They're symbolic hymns. They're songs of praise and songs of relationship with the cosmos. And they exist on several levels. So there's the material level where, let's take the first Rik. And Rik is basically like verse, hymn. The first Rik of the whole Rig Veda, Agni Mi'ile, the first word, let's say the first word, Agni Mi'ile, Agni Mi'ile. Agni is fire. Agni Mi'ile is I adore the flame. So this is the first word, as far as I'm concerned, this is the first word of yoga. I adore the flame. Agni Mi'ile. Adoration implies relationship. So I am in relationship with the flame on the material, physical, chemical level, fire. I am in relationship with the fire. I adore the fire. On the emotional level, there's fire. There's the flame of aspiration. There's the flame of desire. There's the flame that lives inside of each of us. On the mental level, there's the kind of purifying flame of clear thought. On the spiritual level, there's the flame that always burns up towards the divine, the flame of the soul. And so the Vedas exist on each of these levels, the Vedic hymns. They exist on each of these levels, the material, the emotional, the mental, psychological level, and the spiritual level. And they reflect and describe a universe that is much more than just what we see, just much more than just the visible. Agni Mi'ile is a invocation of adoration for Agni, the being that lives inside the flame. Agni mi'ile purohitam, the priest of that mediates. Purohitam yagyasya, the priest of the sacrifice. And there's two things that I really want to, or let's just say two Sanskrit words that contain a whole profound teaching that's rooted in the Veda, in the Rig Veda, that I'm going to talk about today. And we're going to talk more about the Rig Veda next time, so we're not going to totally focus on, we're not going to cover everything today. But the two things I want to mention are Agni, the flame, and Yajna. Yajna means sacrifice. So if you've ever been to a homa or a Vedic ceremony where there's a square kind of altar and a fire is built in it, and there's a priest that's chanting mantras, saying prayers, throwing things into the fire. This is the kind of outer form of the Vedic yajna, the sacrifice. There's offerings that are being made to the fire. That yajna, that the kind of embodied concept or the embodied manifestation of yajna, is the sacrifice of existence. It's the fact of interbeing. Everything in the universe is in a state of sacrifice. Everything is offering itself and receiving. Everything is, because we're in interrelationship, birth, death, growth, decay. This is all sacrifice. We're in a milieu where we can't always get what we want. Sometimes what I want is to the detriment of the whole. Sometimes if I just take everything, the whole will die and then I will die. And so I have to, in order to perpetuate the existence of myself and everything, there has to be some sacrifice of my individuality, of what I might want. And so that's the more archetypal or symbolic representation of the yajna. So the kindling of Agni and the sacrifice of the ego, these are central to yoga through all of the traditions, all of the texts, all of the lineages. The kindling of Agni, the seeking of Agni, the seeking of the inner fire, the seeking of the divine flame, and the sacrifice of the ego, the sacrifice of the individual, the sacrifice of I, me, mine. You'll see as we traverse the different texts that these are themes that are persistent and consistent throughout all of them. And this relationship of adoration, right at the core, Agni mi'ile. This is a multidimensional universe. We're in relationship, not just with stuff, not just with chemical, fire is not just like a chemical reaction. Fire is alive, fire is conscious, fire is relating. I adore the flame and the flame adores me back. I adore the flame and I am in relationship with the flame. So this is central to an understanding of yoga. All throughout the text, there's so many stories and teachings that involve relationship of the human and the invisible, the human and the multidimensional. And when Western anthropologists came in and started studying the Vedas and the texts of yoga, they ascribed to them what they considered kind of a primitive, materialistic, these people are worshiping the sun. They don't really understand, the true, of course they had their kind of Christian, most of them, background and worldview that they were coming from. So they kind of viewed the Vedic spirituality as lower and also as unsubtle, kind of very dense. Like, when they say sun, they mean sun. When they say fire, they mean fire. When they say rain, they mean rain. When they say thunderbolt, they mean thunderbolt. And what they missed was that there's a very subtle cosmology that is represented symbolically by all of the different characters and all of the different interactions of the Veda, of the Rig Veda Samhita. And one of the things that happened in ancient India after the time that the original Vedic Samhita was received, which is symbolically called Satya Yuga, the original primal yuga. So the time is basically divided in the kind of yogic concept into four eons or four time periods: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Satya Yuga was when the Rig Veda was received originally, and the people understood all the symbolism, and they lived in this multidimensional universe where they could it wasn't like they had to kind of imagine that they could feel the divine being of the fire living inside the fire. It was just there. There was an interactive relationship. The Treta Yuga, things became a little bit more ritualized. And this is when the next layer of the Veda, the Brahmanas, were written and kind of coalesced around the root of the Samhita. So coalesced around the symbolic root of the teaching. The Brahmanas were ritualization, and they became kind of overly focused on, like, the ritual is the thing. So what, again, I mentioned before, the Vedic homa. If you've been to a homa and seen the ritual that happens, there's lots of rules about how things have to be done, and there's lots of structure. And there was a bit of a losing the symbolism and the dynamism and the kind of relationship, multidimensional relationship of the original Samhita in the accretion of the Brahmanas. And then you have the Aranyakas, and the Aranyakas, basically, the translation is forest treaties or forest treatises, forest texts. So then, you have this society where this profound spiritual truth, spiritual reality has been kind of drowned out in ritual, and the life has been lost. The nectar of it, the taste of it has been lost. And so people start to, want more. And they start to leave the cities. They start to go out into the forests, into the countryside, to seek Agni, to seek Indra, to seek Saraswati, to seek the truth. These Vedas, what happened? And these are the Shramanas. The Shramanas go off, and there was a huge movement of people who were seeking truth, leaving society, living on the fringes of society. They formed what were called ashrams. So ashrams were collectives of Shramanas. The word Shramana has to do with striving, like effort. And they were seeking Agni. They were seeking the truth. They were seeking the truth of their souls. And the Upanishads and the Aranyakas came out of their teachings. And so did things like the Yoga Sutras. And so did Buddhism. And so did lots of the kind of the Bhagavad Gita. These kind of assimilative texts are like compilations of thousands of years of seeking done by collectives of Shramanas. And so that's how you get from the Vedas from the Vedic Samhita through the Brahmanas to the Upanishads. The Upanishads are these much more profound. The symbolism is still there, but it's not as impenetrable. It's much more clear that what the Upanishads are talking about is the nature of the human soul. They're asking the questions and answering the questions. What is going on here? Who am I? What is this body? What is this soul? Why am I here? Who are you? What are you doing here? What's our relationship? What's the sun? It's much more straightforward. The Kena Upanishad, Kena means basically who. So it starts with a bunch of questions, who is it that set the mind on its course to understanding? Who is it that made my eyes so that I can see? Who is it that made my ears so that I can hear? So this is the kind of the nature of the Upanishads. And also a lot of this, the Shramanas, what they were seeking was an understanding of how do I live a meaningful, like, how can life have a purpose when there's suffering? How come when people die, suffer and die, like, what's the point of all this? And there's texts like the Samkhya Karika and a lot of the Upanishads begin with this question of, like, what is up with suffering? And you can see how Buddhism arrives straight out of there. What is up? What is all this pain about? How do we find a way through all this suffering? And the Sankhya Karika in specific, which we'll talk about in a few months, it's kind of like, well, the Vedic rituals haven't solved the problem, so we're going to need to kind of go after this ourselves. That's the basic formulation. I think that sums up the sentiment of the Shramanas. It's like, yeah, the rituals. I mean, you think about in the West, looking back at Christianity, the churches establishing themselves, the priests are the intermediary, and you need to give money to the priest in order to, get into heaven. And you need to ask the priest, if you want to talk to God, the priest is between you and God. I imagine the same sort of societal framework building up during the time of the Brahmanas. And then the Shramanas are kind of reacting to that, stepping out and saying, like, you're not going to tell me, you're not going to be my intermediary. I'm going to find God myself. And then there's all these streams, the individual Guru Shishya Paramparas. Every ashram has their own guru and their own lineage. And some of these things were captured in text. Some of these teachings were captured in text. And so we have a point in time, like, oh, wow, there's a text. There's a whole bunch of information here. There's a whole bunch of wisdom here from this particular time and space. And then others weren't. Others were subterranean, just flowing from teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student over time. Yoga, I'm sure many of you have heard the word, the sense of the word union. Yoga being union. And one of the core teachings, or, it's hard to use the word teaching because the Veda, the Rig Veda Samhita is so symbolic that it's not like the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna is talking to Arjuna and saying, like, I'm teaching you something now. It's not like that. But one of the core messages that's embedded in the symbolism is that that each of us is an evolving being. We're in a multidimensional universe where we are evolving asatoma satgamaya, from ignorance, from falsehood, from non-being, from not truth to sat, truth. Asatoma satgamaya. And this prayer is an asking to be led. Asatoma satgamaya. Please lead us from non-being, falsehood, ignorance to truth, reality. Tamasoma jyotirgamaya, from darkness to light. Mrityor ma amritam gamaya, from death to immortality. So we are limited, confused, deluded by duality. We're living in a situation where we can't see the divine. We don't know who we are. We don't know why we're here. But each of us and the entire earth and the entire human race and all beings are moving toward knowledge, understanding, light, immortality. So this is one of the core conceptions of the Veda, that this is an evolutionary universe. We are evolutionary beings. And the divine one, which needs nothing, which is complete into itself, has embedded itself progressively into the depths of inconscient limitation. It has coalesced all its infinite radiance into the opposite, into finiteness, absolute finiteness. It's condensed all of its all-knowingness into ignorance, absolute ignorance. And then it's starting to unfurl. This is involution. The divine involves itself into ignorance, density, limitation, and then it evolves itself. This is evolution. It's an unfurling of the divine, and it progressively recognizing itself. And we are part of that unfurling of evolution. And as I'm sure you may have noticed, it's not over. We are not the pinnacle of this evolution. We are on an evolutionary path, and we are growing. And this is the path of yoga. Yoga is this evolution. We can focus our attention, concentration, intentionally align ourselves with this evolution, or we can also just go along for the ride, and that's fine too. I'm going to share my screen quickly, and then I'm going to show you one thing, and then we're going to have some breakout time. Just want to give you one image to go along with that. And it's after the spine stuff. This is it. This is a drawing done by the mother, who was the inspiration for the city of Oroville. And you'll learn much more about her. I won't say much more about her right now, but this is a diagram that she drew for a child. And all these lines, all these lines, back and forth, back and forth. This is evolution. This is evolution. This is where we're all going. This is the path of yoga, the straight path. So the path of yoga is the intentional decision to go straight to the goal. Oops. To go straight to the goal, and to go through all the obstacles and all the difficulties and all the confusion and all the pain that it requires to get there more directly. But the whole earth and all beings are moving along this circuitous path of yoga. Sri Aurobindo said, all life is yoga. And so all life aspires, all life grows towards itself, all life is emerging, all life is becoming more conscious, more aware all the time. That means me, that means you, that means your pet friends, that means the trees and the rocks and the stars. Everything in the cosmos is growing more aware, more awake to its true nature, to its true radiance and its infinite reality. And yoga is, we align ourselves, we decide we're going to kindle the flame of Agni inside of us that burns straight up. Have you ever noticed to take a flame, you can't quite turn it upside down? The flame always burns up. This is Agni. Agni is always reaching toward the divine, reaching toward the heavens. And so inside of each of us is this flame of Agni. And in yoga practice, we cultivate, we kindle this flame of Agni, and we allow it to burn. We allow it to purify. We allow it to transform. This is what fire naturally does. And we sacrifice I, me, mine, this smaller self and its fears and beliefs and trappings. We sacrifice that to the flame. We offer that to the flame, knowing that that's not all we are. That behind all of that, beyond all of that, we are infinite radiance. So the path of yoga is natural, it's innate, it's organic, and it's evolutionary. It's not something that we have to superimpose upon ourselves. It's in us. And it's a progressive path of reconciling all disharmonies, resolving all conflicts, inner and outer. This is the path of yoga. All of our disharmonies, all of our confusions inside of ourselves are resolved through yoga. And if something that we're doing is not moving us forward towards harmony, towards resolution, towards clarity, then it is diverging from the path of yoga, albeit temporarily.